this week's edition of Make a Thing. It's Halloween, and it's super nice outside. And we got a bunch of stuff done this week. A lot of coloring for all the animation. And we're going to start putting up some animation stuff probably next week. And we had a great meeting this morning. And we also published, or are publishing, a new episode of Long Live the Queen, which you can check out on this very channel. But for today's episode, I got to speak with Gareth and Wes and talk about writing and creativity. And we'll start that right now. Okay. So I guess, we're going to talk about the process of writing this, and also our individual processes of writing. I've written a bunch of screenplays, but the only ones that have been made are the ones that I have made. Which is, something to be said about the business of screenwriting itself, and trying to get things sold is a whole different bag. And that sort of is part of what motivated making this thing to begin with.
And I can totally relate to that, by the way, even though part of the reason I got into doing graphic novels is because I could sort of do the whole thing myself, and
right.
I didn't have to, get things approved by a bajillion people or work with a ton of people to get something done. Even so, I have to mostly pitch the thing and do the thing. Like usually nobody comes to me with something or takes something and just runs with it. It's like I have to do it from beginning to end. Right.
And because the way that we've been talking about doing this thing is very sort of open source, right? And so the approach to how we're building the story is looser than normal, much looser. But at the same time, we played through the game, and so we know what the general story is. For me, I feel like there's my normal process of writing is I will just do exploratory stuff. I don't write it like an outline, or I don't do anything generalized or organized at all. I just start writing scenes that I like, and I throw those around and show those to people and see what they respond to. And then slowly it sort of gets shuffled together in my brain. And in a sense, that's I've continued that attitude in just from that's how I run games, right? And that's how the game happens. I have a sort of a vague idea, I just throw things over. But you're coming from a much more you've done massive adaptations of classic literature, and you've also written Wisteria scripts. So is there a difference between what the page to page on that, or how do you feel about how totally. We should go? Yeah.
I mean, so when I'm adapting, of course, it's very different. It's very linear, and it's about just reading something and then basically just letting my brain chew on it for not very long, and then spit it out again as okay, here's what I think was the essence of that.
Right.
Or in some cases, just directly editing Shakespeare's text, literally not writing anything, just editing it. But when I'm writing for myself, when I'm writing for Wisteria, when I'm trying to write an original graphic novel or a children's book or something like that, all of which are things that I've tried to do, I still, I guess, have a kind of a linear process. I usually have an idea for a beginning first, and then I'm trying to figure out where it goes and where it ends. But it is much more of a following threads kind of thing. I have this idea for this character, and I'm going to follow the thread and see where that goes. And maybe right. It's almost like trying to go through a maze. It's that was a dead end. Let's go back and let's try going this way.
Yeah, totally.
That's kind of how it feels to me.
I mean, because when we're doing, because this video is coming out simultaneously with the Long Live the Queen artificial podcast that we're doing.
This is so meta.
It gets more meta every day.
You and I are talking about writing, and I just pretended to be a writer talking about the writing process on Wisteria.
Right, exactly. And so it's this sort of for me, it's simulating what happens, at least in my brain when I'm trying to write. Is like you said with the maze, I'm just sort of hacking my way through wherever I can get to. And like the more interaction I have, like this is what it's awesome with working with you guys on this is like it's like the challenge that I have when I'm working on my own material is when I'm not in the zone on something, then writing is like dragging a bag of bricks. It's like the worst. But like the way that we're approaching this is like all I got to do is talk to you, and then like 60 different new ideas come out on the table. And even when we were doing the thing today, the podcast, I said just before we started recording this, I was just like, there's this question of like, so for people that didn't listen to the podcast, so there's in the game world of Wisteria, which is part of the science fiction of the story we're telling, there is a character you can play who writes novels, and everybody can play that character and be a part of the novel writing process in the world of Wisteria. And that question came up of, so there's this writer who exists in Wisteria, and he is married, and fans of the books that are published in the real world also want to know, is this guy's wife actually writing these books, or is it him? And so when we talked it out during the interview, like you guys talked it out in the interview, it's totally fascinating. And afterwards I listened to it, I was like, there's like a weird Schrodinger's cat element now, like to what happens in that house.
What happens upstairs in Thomas DeLeon's house.
Exactly. Like both things could be true.
No comment.
Until we look. And like, and the super meta-ness of it is that it's true. Like that's true fictionally for the story we're writing, like in a really, really real way, which you guys will see more of later. But it's also completely true for the process of how we do this.
Yeah,
like nothing is true until we say that it's true, I guess, is the way that yes. It rolls out. And
and also just on a super like just basic level, like each episode is written a different way. Some of it is like, oh, I had this idea and then, Dan wrote it, or, I just had this idea that I didn't even tell anybody and I wrote a thing and then, Wes edited it. And, right. It's just like, and Dan has written a bunch of the episodes and then, just come back and showed us and we're like, it's perfect. So there's like a whole, some of them are super collaborative and others are just one person, but most of them are like something came out of that, like that, right. Like ping, 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 ping. And then somebody ran with it. And then we all kind of, messed with it a little bit and said, awesome. And exactly. Really a little bit like there's not a whole lot of editing going on. Yeah,
exactly. It's just like, if it's cool, it's in, and like there's it's sort of like the, for friends that I know that work in doing improv, it's the yes and idea, and I think that it's like, it's so it's super, super inspiring to work this way. But I was like, when I was thinking of like thinking about like the kind of work that if people haven't seen Gareth's graphic novels, like they're unbelievably awesome. The Iliad, the Odyssey, Macbeth, et cetera, like go to garethhines.com.
Yep.
I think garethhines.com and check these out. It's completely amazing. But I feel like because we gamed this whole thing out to begin with, there is a source text essentially.
Yeah. Right.
that we
are. This is in a sense an adaptation. Yeah.
And it's a freewheeling adaptation of a freewheeling bit of creativity, and we're trying to maintain that sort of vibe as we go forward. But is there anything like you just, as long as I've known you, like you just sort of jump into a thing and start to figure out how to do it, and then you figure out a process to do it, and that's it. Is there anything you've read that has augmented your view on how to go about this, or is it just strictly business stuff that you've read, or is there creative stuff that you read?
Yeah, I think that it's easier and more useful to find stuff that tells you how to do, the legal stuff, the formatting stuff, all those kind of just details that are relatively objective. than to find good writing advice. But I mean, there's good writing advice out there, but it's like, what do you need to hear on a given day? It totally changes.
Right.
And I don't really believe in like systems, where it's like, oh, it has to follow this structure and you have to make sure there's this thing.
Right.
And also, by the way, those systems are like Western male white hegemonical kind of like constructions.
Right.
And so there's an argument to be made that not every story should follow those conventions for those reasons.
At least there's a number there. Like, we shouldn't be under the illusion that there's only one way to do it.
Yeah.
And like, I think that it's like the whatever the hero's journey stuff is great. Right. And there's plenty of stuff that I love hero's journey style. And like that's a perfectly reasonable way to go about writing something. But there's a zillion other motifs you can use for this stuff, and like different zillion other kinds of practices. But the way that I look at that material, because I've read a fair amount of like, how to write blah 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 books and inspirational writing books, and I think you're right. Like, it's like, for the most part, it's sort of like inspirational quote kind of material. But at the same extent, like, sometimes inspirational quotes are actually useful. If you see something like we all need inspiration. We all need inspiration, right? And so when I see those things like stuff like Save the Cat is a super popular model for writing screenplays. Yep. Like, I think that those things. Oh, I'm just gonna close the door because we got a leaf blower right here. 1 second.
Leaf blowers.
Leaf blowers. Like, I actually really like that stuff, but not in the way that it's used. Like there's another one, Story. Like, what's his name? I can't remember. Anyway, a very popular book, Story is what it's called. And like stuff like that, or Save the Cat. It's like, if you think of these as things to slam your head against, then it's like they're tools, so you can hang your story on it and see what happens and see if anything interesting happens. Yeah. Then it's good. Yeah. Like, I think that like people tend to look at these things as like, this is how it's got to be, and you got to follow this beat by this beat by this beat. And I don't think that I think that leads you down a dead end. Sarah, you're being recorded right now. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay, we're doing, this is the make a thing.
That's what I figured. Yeah, I love that it's make a thing. I'm a star. I'm on make a thing.
It is, right? So the meta flavor of what we're doing is like to me, like, it's a perfect combination of like structure and zero structure. That is very inspiring to me. And so that's where we're at. And I wanted to know if you wanted to hop in on that at any point.
Are you kidding?
Hold me back.
So I think, okay, so I'm going to go back to, so I have some experience as a songwriter, right? I went to Berklee College of Music and I did all that kind of stuff. And one of the most effective things I ever did as a songwriter, well, I guess a couple of things. First of all, a good friend of mine said to me early on, the way to write a good song is to first write 87 really bad songs. And that was a very freeing thing to hear and onboard. The other thing that happened was there was a more experienced songwriter friend of mine who got me on board with, we'd get together on Wednesday nights. We'd call each other at 7:00. We would decide on some constraints. And then at 10:00, we'd call each other back with the songs we'd spend the last 3 hours writing. And the thing about that was the constraints. If it's write a song, that's impossible. But if it's write a song about daffodils whose verses are in a minor key and whose major and whose choruses have an odd meter, it's like, okay, I could do that in 3 hours. That's fine, right? And getting the amount of constraint right is key. Like, write a song with this melody, that's harder. But if you get the right constraints, then it's just a frame, and it's just like if you have the right frame, then the parts that aren't ready to be art can be filled in with craft. And when you start doing the craft, some art sneaks in around the edges, and it's like, okay, it all works. And that's the thing I think that we've gotten for ourselves here in this phase of this project, right? Like, we've got our own Slack, we've got like the podcast, we've got this other stuff, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, we don't know what we're gonna do. And it's a nice push pull, right? It's just the right amount of structure. And I love that
because it's because the structure of the rules become the inspiration, like
totally.
And I think that's but this just connects to what I just said when you came on, is that there are screenplay books that advise you how to do something, right? Just write with these beats and whatever it is. And I was saying to Gareth, like, I'm not against these things. Like Save the Cat has actually been really useful to me a couple of times, because I can sort of drape what I've written on it and see if anything pops out of it. Like, that's fun, and then like it makes me think of things that I wouldn't have thought of beforehand. But if you try and tie it to it, then it's going to break. Like, it's not going to work that way. Like, if you look at these things as like you said, like, set down, like it's about flowers and it's got this meter, go, then you're going to come up with what, like, your mind wants to answer the question, right? Instead of just like, what is the question? And if you sit and like you think what is the question for 6 hours, then like, that's 6 hours you could have been playing Gloomhaven.
6 hours you should have been playing Gloomhaven. We should all be like, that's my new bar. Like, is the thing I'm doing better than playing Gloomhaven? And I got to say, a lot of my current activities do not rise to that level.
Do not rise to the Gloomhaven
Isaac
level.
Childress, I bow before you. Yeah, exactly.
It's very, very true.
Exactly.
But yeah, so so yeah, like, I think that it's weird in this way that we gamed it out once, right? And now we're gaming it out again, but recording it.
Totally. I really, what I really like is that we're allowed to have serious discussions about, is this thing in the world? And at the same time, we're just making the shit up, so it's fine, right? Exactly. Like, it's a nice and fun,
well, like one of the things that we said is like that we established early on, it's like put it out there, and once it's out there, it's a thing. And if the thing contradicts another thing at some point, we just messed it up, then fuck it, we'll make up an explanation. Like, it's going to be solved at some point. Like, it's going to get fixed.
Well, now I think you've touched on something really interesting there. I'll push back just a little bit. Mm-hmm. I don't think I'm going to disagree, but I will push back a bit. So on one hand, yes, you're right. You can't be so beholden to the rules that you keep yourself from playing. Like, the primary mandate is you got to be having fun with it, right? But on the other hand, I think we've done a good job, and I think that, well, I at least continue to focus on, okay, what part of this is through composed? What are the rules of the universe? Mm-hmm. And in some of our pre-production conversations, we talk about, okay, what are the implications here? So on one hand, yeah, it's okay for us to break the rules and for us to contradict ourselves, and that's all fine. But at the same time, that I think that's only possible because of some of the thought we've put into, okay, what are the rules of this universe? Right. Because it's not just willy-nilly. Like, we're trying to tell a larger story through the constraints that make up this world.
Right. Because what ends up in the front end is the real part of the story. Yeah. Like what ends up being, like, what we commit is stuff that we have to now play by. Right.
And one of the things that's coolest about that is, if we really commit to that, and I think we've done a good job of this, and you've helped me see this, Dan, is that if we wind up like dropping a bunch of rocks into the ocean that forms an archipelago that looks in a particular shape, right? Whatever, like, we can trust that the audience is going to be able to see all the rock under the surface of the water that makes, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, we don't need to expose every detail of this creation, right? The shape that presents itself through the channels we've given implies so much. Right. If the listener can trust that we've thought it through and we're not completely winging it, which, as it happens, we have thought it through and we're not completely winging it. We're just having fun.
Exactly. Because because we talked about this, like, I don't know if we've recorded it, but it's the constellation theory of storytelling, where it's just like, you want to put the points down, right? And then you say to the reader, just like, oh, does not look like a swan, and then they start seeing the swan, and they start seeing a different swan than any other audience member is, but they're all seeing a swan. Like, we hinted that's true, but they're engaged in it and creating it partially themselves. And I think that the best movies actually work a lot like that. Blade Runner does that. Like, Blade Runner becomes almost mythical in this way, because like, it tells you almost nothing. It gives you just this little tiny bit of architecture, and then it becomes a very meaningful thing for people to interpret.
Gareth, check me on this. Doesn't that sound exactly like something your buddy would say? What's his name? Dan Thrawn? Is that him? Yeah.
I actually just mutter that in my sleep all the time.
Sounds like a Thrawn-ism.
It's very, very true. Anyway, I want to say thank you guys for hopping on this, and hopefully we can do another recording at some point soon.
I mean, if you think it's a good idea, share whatever.
It's super, super, super fun. And I don't know if I introed this separately, but maybe I should look at the camera and say, let's make a thing for Halloween weekend. Happy Halloween, everybody.
Happy Halloween indeed.
Happy Halloween.
I will also sign off. That is this week's Make a Thing. See you guys next week. Happy Halloween. Bye.